sujet. Je vous lis un texte qui a été préparé et qui est, à mon avis, extrêmement précis. Donc, étant donné que ce n'est pas non plus ma spécialité, je pense que c'est bien de le lire à ce jour. Nous savons que les conditions de vie difficiles peuvent provoquer chez l'enfant un stress dit toxique en raison des environnements nuisibles qui l'entourent, du cumul des difficultés qu'il éprouve et de sa prédisposition génétique. Plus la réponse au stress devient toxique, plus le développement de l'enfant risque d'être compromis, en particulier le développement de son cerveau. Deux questions interpellent donc les chercheurs sur l'application des connaissances scientifiques. Quelle preuve scientifique lie l'impact du stress toxique à l'architecture du cerveau, donc éventuellement au développement de l'enfant? Et que recommandent les chercheurs pour intégrer les données probantes aux interventions auprès des enfants issus de milieux vulnérables? Alors, c'est un peu à ça qu'on va essayer de répondre ce matin. Dr. Diamond, if you want to start.
I suppose I should start by saying something about what executive functions are. Think about what it might take to be successful in a career, in a job. One thing is probably creative problem solving, being able to think outside the box. We haven't figured out a way how to help the most vulnerable kids. How can we think outside the box and come up with something that's more successful than what's been able to be done before? Flexibility, being able to take advantage of unexpected opportunities or to navigate around unexpected obstacles. Self-control, so we don't say something we'd regret. We don't put our foot in our mouths. We don't act impulsively. And probably discipline, to be able to stay at the task even though it takes a long time and rewards may be a long time in coming. Well, all of those are executive functions or depend on them. Executive functions include self-control and discipline, include cognitive flexibility, which would be creative problem solving and flexibility, and also working memory, holding information in mind and being able to work with it as you need for reasoning or problem solving or understanding anything that you hear. Executive functions depend on prefrontal cortex. Executive functions and prefrontal cortex are the most vulnerable to stress. They're the first to take a hit, and they take the largest hit. They also take a hit if you're sad, if you're lonely, if you're sleep deprived, if you're not healthy, if you're not physically fit. So any society that cares about children being able to do well in school, children to be able to do well after school in jobs, has to care that their executive functions aren't impaired by things like stress, by things like not being physically fit. If we care about physical health, we have to care about executive functions, because poor executive functions are associated with poor health, such as overeating and obesity, substance abuse, not following through on doctor's orders. How can we reduce stress in children's lives? There are many ways, but one of the most important is to take time to listen, like you did in the film. There's nothing so powerful as to be heard and understood, to feel that somebody cares enough to take their time and to truly listen. So one of the most powerful things we can do for children is just take the time to be there and hear them, not to suggest solutions to them, but to just take the time for the solutions to emerge from them.
Thank you very much. That's very efficient.
I'm a pediatrician, and I come from a country which has a reputation of being one of the best for people to live in, not least for children. We have a very sound and stable economy in the country, and it's increasing. We have a great support system for people who live there, especially focused from the beginning on families and on children. We have a health system that works fine for children as well. And as a result, we also have the probably one of the most healthy populations in the world. And that is at least how it used to be. And this is the general picture that still is floating around. But if you look at it closely and under the surface, you see that things are changing now. Things are not as they used to be. There is some new things coming into the situation, not least for families and children. You see that the families are living under greater strain now. You realize, you see from reports, and when you meet families, that they have less time for their children, and they have less time to deal with their needs, which is the ultimate purpose of most families, to love their children and to be with their children and to encourage and to make good development for their children. But there is less time for that, and things are changing a bit all over the country. And of course, there is a great concern about politicians and professionals. What is happening? How come that the children are, the consequences for children is obviously very clear. They have, you have more psychosomatic problems. They sleep less, they eat less, they have a lot of stomach problems, and they are not so happy in schools as they used to be. They are not so happy with their friends as they used to be, and they are not so happy with their parents as they used to be. So what is really happening now? How come that these things are changing, and what is the reasons for that? Is it so that the resistance in individuals are changing? Are there some psychological, spiritual activities going on that we don't know about? Or is it something else? Is it the structure, the organization of society and the support from society to the individuals and the families that are changing? And of course, I'm open for all kinds of discussions and inputs on the psychological, the mental, even the spiritual effects. But I also think it's important to look at the structure of the society. And since I'm working mostly in public health and child public health, I think it is my concern is that the societal structure has changed. You have got more inequity in our society. The income is increasing all over in the population, but even the poor are getting a little bit better, but the richer are getting even more than that. So the increase, the gap between groups of people is increasing. And that is not only in my country, this is the fact all over. I suppose most of you have read Sir Michael Marmot's reports on closing the gap in a century, where he found, looking at the situation in Europe and in England and in rich countries all over, that the difference, the increasing differences between people, those who have and those who have not, are increasing. And I think that's one of the most important thing. And I see it personally when I'm conducting my studies on child health indicators that I've been doing now for some years in Sweden, in the European Union, in Greenland, and in cities and in areas, in municipalities in Sweden. I see the differences between the groups are increasing. And I think this is something that we really should look at. And to do that and to get the attention of politicians, we need films like this one. We need films to show it in a way that we researchers and scientists cannot do. we need facts. As I used to say, in God we trust, all others need facts. And we need facts, we need figures, we need things to show that things are happening. But we also need this kind of input into the, to increase the knowledge and the understanding of what is happening. I think I stop there and I can come back to other issues later.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kohler.
I think a really important theme for the next 2 days is going to be colleagues and collaborators. And I think Dr. Diamond spoke about executive functioning, and I think that one of the things about listening and talking and thinking together is the insights that are created. And those happen in big rooms with 250 people. Sometimes they happen on a 6-hour car ride from Rochester with close colleagues. I wanted to open my comments by bringing you words from two Rochesterians, two leaders from Rochester. One of them is Frederick Douglass. He wrote a book that many of you are familiar with called The Narrative of the Life of an American Slave. And he lived in Rochester for 30 years. His most productive years were in Rochester. And he said something that actually is quoted at the beginning of the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement on toxic stress. And he said, "It is better to build strong children than to repair broken men." It's better to build strong children than to repair broken men. And to me, the next 2 days are about a paradigm shift, about shifting our thinking. And there's a really important shift that needs to happen, which is unless we begin to think about building strong children. And I'm so glad Maxime is in front of me as a strong man, as an illustration of that. But and I can see why you're the object of much love. You know, unless we start to think about that paradigm shift of stopping the reaction and the treatment and promoting health, we are not going to make the progress that we need to make. The second Rochesterian I want to quote is a colleague in pediatrics. Many consider Dr. Bob Haggerty to be one of the founders of community or social pediatrics. He's 92 years old. I had a cup of coffee with him about a week ago. Still comes into the university every couple of weeks. He said in 1995, another thing that I think is really important as a paradigm shift, he said, "We must become partners with others, or we will become increasingly irrelevant to the health of children." We must become partners with others, or we will become increasingly irrelevant to the health of children. He was talking from the standpoint, of course, of our profession of pediatrics. And so along the lines of colleagues and collaborators and that statement by Dr. Haggerty, it is wonderful to see you here. We are the partners. We are the paradigm shift.
J'étais très ému et un peu triste
I was moved and I was a bit sad to see after that presentation that we've now so far from the Aboriginal culture. It was much closer to life. So we lost our way, I think. And it reminds me of something else. In the past, the Romans knew that a healthy environment was more pleasant. It was better, of course, for your health. And those who wanted went to live up in the hills, or they would go on Capri Island in the summer, but most inhabitants had to stay in Rome, unfortunately. And also that's what happened in England 100 years ago, and in Montreal, when people who could would go and live far from unhealthy neighborhoods. And we understood also that at first the industry was not very good for people's health. In England, for example, there were changes in the working conditions, and also there was the union movement, and then health improved. That was physical health, but also mental health, of course, and spiritual health of people. And also, when we got rid of child labor in the plants, adults were healthier. It seems that we forgot all that. Now we know the influence of toxic stress on children, not only insofar as cells are concerned, but also molecules, DNA. We have a lot of information about this, and we'll be talking about that in more details. But what's lacking, and that's the next real test, real challenge, we have to build a bridge between our knowledge and our actions. How will we educate the public about the importance of the environment where a child grows, and also the politicians, the decision makers in our community, in our society? They have to be aware of that. They have to be convinced of that. It's not only a matter of money, but of course any money invested in children has a cost, is long term insofar as results are concerned. So it's not immediate. That is why the politician has to have a longer term view and not only think about his or her election. Later, I will be talking in more detail of the way of building such bridges. But what is certain that, of course, everything has to be science-based, but also we have to look at the emotional side. Look, in your life, the most important decisions you make are based on emotions. The movie we've just seen, this video, we're moved by it because it creates an emotion in us. We have to have partners, of course, as was said, with scientists, with politicians, but also with artists, because artists are the ones who interpret our society and are remembered. The doctors in Rome, ancient Rome, they're forgotten, but we still read Roman authors. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that your comments show us what you will be able to bring to us this morning.
But now let's go back a little bit. What do we know more? What does science tell us about toxic stress, for example, that can be applied to a better prevention or a better system of treatment? Who wants to start? And take your time to explain to us, because that's part of the reason why people are here, to know a little bit more about the advance of the knowledge in the field of pediatrics.
So I think I'll address the aspect of what science tells us about the effects of toxic stress, what we know. One thing science tells us is that experience affects gene expression, epigenetics. So stress affects the expression of genes. And what it does to the gene expression impairs how the brain functions. It impairs how the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex are able to work. You're not able to learn as well. You're not able to remember as well. And you're more vulnerable to stress in the future. You're hypersensitive to pain or stress in the future. because of the sensitization as a young child. So we know that it gets as deep as the DNA. We also know that stress will impair the connection between prefrontal cortex and other regions of the brain. We know that the main neurotransmitter in prefrontal cortex is dopamine. Prefrontal cortex needs dopamine just as your car engine needs gasoline. But what happens if you flood your car engine with gasoline? The effect of stress, even mild stress, is to flood prefrontal cortex with dopamine. So you can't think as clearly, you can't exercise as good self-control. So when I'm stressed, for example, I reach for the chocolate. My self-control goes out the window. You don't exercise as good selective attention when you're sad. You exercise better selective attention when you're happy. It affects all of the executive functions. And so you can look like you have an executive function impairment, like ADHD. When you don't, you're simply stressed. And that affects every aspect of your life that you need problem solving for and you need self-control for, which means it affects just about every aspect of your life. It also affects interpersonal connections because you're often more difficult to get along with. You're more impulsive. You're and less reliable. And I also wanted to talk about disorders like asthma. The main cause of asthma is stress. If you're stressed, you're much more likely to be asthmatic. If you're not stressed, you're much less likely to be asthmatic. There's a causal connection that we can go through the biology of why that happens. You want to improve children's health, you reduce their stress. There's a direct relationship. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Good. Who wants to keep on? Dr. Kozorowski?
Yeah, so I'm humbled to be next to Dr. Diamond because I'm not a basic scientist. My role is, the way that I see my role is sort of trying to take what science knows and translate it to the community and translate it to how we train doctors in pediatrics in particular. You know, there's a saying that good decisions are based on good facts. And science is about providing us with the facts to make those next decisions about how pediatricians should be trained, about how communities should behave to really try and improve the health, promote the health of kids. One thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of the science is it's well known that adverse childhood experiences are incredibly common. We saw illustrations of that in the film today. But the most recent child health survey data from the United States shows that a third of adults in the general population in the United States had 2 or more adverse childhood experiences in their lives. And so this term adverse childhood experience is a way of saying that they had abuse or neglect, that they had domestic violence in their homes, that they had a parent who had a significant mental illness, that they had a parent who had a substance abuse problem, that there was divorce. A third. So this is a common occurrence, and it has incredible impact, not just for the kids, but the point of the film was that it impacts our whole lives, our life trajectories. If you look at the ACE studies, the Centers for Disease Control Studies, looking at the long-term outcomes of kids with adverse childhood experiences, there's a linear relationship between those adverse childhood experiences. So you have, it's additive, it's amazing. The graphs are amazing. You think someone made them up. If you have the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the worse health outcomes you have as an adult. And we're not just talking about health outcomes that some people might come to and might say are important: mental illness, substance abuse. We're talking about liver disease. We're talking about heart disease. We're talking about the #1 causes of mortality. So science tells us that this entity of toxic stress is common and incredibly important for the health of kids for certain, but also for the health of the entire population as adults.
Dr. Steinmetz?
Il faut se rappeler
I think we
que
have to remember
notre ressource naturelle,
that our natural
la ressource
resource,
première de notre
the
société
first
sont les
natural resources in our society are
enfants. Et on ne les
children,
traite pas comme notre ressource
but we do
première.
not take care of them as national or natural resources. Oil is more important, or that's the way we treat it. But the real resources, the real natural resources,
Les enfants, ils sont pas toxiques.
you know, they say that maybe oil can be toxic, but not children. But children may become toxic if we do not take care of them,
de faciliter leur développement.
if we do not help them to develop in a positive way. And very often we say people who are in underprivileged sector, you know, they are stuck in the situation because they don't want to come out of it. But there have been many studies carried out in the US called Moving to Opportunity, or in other cities throughout the US, where we gave money to, well, we had three groups of people. One, we were dealing with very underprivileged communities. And one community, where there was no intervention and they were being followed up. Another group, we gave them some money to say, well, you can move, but you have to stay in the same neighborhood. And a third group, we gave them money so that they can find a house. The same amount of money, but one condition is that they have to come out of their neighborhood. And it was really interesting to compare the three groups. And what we observed over the years is how family developed and how children developed, and also crime level, and those who had, you know, higher scores at school, and those who were in the house in the third group grew better. So this is really a question of social policies, priorities, to invest in early childhood, and to also have some kind of an entity or body in the society. We have the Commission for the Protection of Youth. They have a great terms of reference, but they don't really fill this mandate. They do not teach. They do studies, they gather data, but they don't really do research or education of the public. They do not inform the elected representative of the results, even though they have the mandate to do so, but they do not do that. So I think for the minister, this is important to maybe see what this commission on youth rights, what they do. They have a beautiful mandate, but they don't fulfill it. And if they were doing it, this would really help our society to move forward, and it will be also, you know, a good sign in the right direction.
Dr. Cody, you want to add something?
Yes, I fully agree that it is very important with the scientific basis to know what you're doing and to find out what is happening inside the brain and outside the brain. But there are also different kinds of science. I mean, you need not only the basic science, so to speak. You need also the sciences that deal with populations, epidemiology and these kind of sciences. And you need how to learn how to transform this scientific knowledge into practice, to let other people who are going to decide, the politicians, the other decision makers, understand what you're doing. And you also need to include this kind of knowledge that you have into the training of the professionals that we are involved, the pediatricians and other people, of course. And to introduce and to really get them to understand that you need to know this kind of new approaches, to let the doctors understand that it's not enough to know about the disease or about the individual who has a disease, but also why does this individual has this disease? Because he comes from a certain surrounding, he lives in a certain area, or he has some connections. I think that's very important. They used to say it takes 10 years to introduce a new knowledge into a textbook, but then it takes 15 years to get the wrong one out. And I think we should move both directions, take out the old and introduce these new ones. I think that's very important. And also the fact that whatever you're doing when you come out as a doctor, you should know about the circumstances, the social, economic, and the practical circumstances that your patients are living in. That's one of my important messages, really, to broaden the knowledge of what we as child professionals are doing.
Dr. Diamond?
I just wanted to add something to the important point Dr. Steinmetz made, because I think it can often be misinterpreted. People hear that the children did better if they lived in the houses, and they forget the important point that the wonderful First Nations woman made, which is that as a community, we are responsible for these children, that it's the community the children are tied to. And often, for the physical protection of the child is moved out of the community and loses the connections with the family, biological family and other family in the community, with the land, with what they're familiar with. And that is so vital for the child to grow up healthy and happy and unstressed. And so we often think only of, it would be nice to have them in a nice house, instead of the critical importance of their embedding in the community and of those important connections in the community. So I just wanted to add that.
But let me bring you back to the original question of the panel. We know more about the effect of toxic stress on the human body, on the development of the brain. We know more and more about that. What can we use from that to better shift our way of dealing with the development of children in difficult communities or areas? What is the impact of what we know more about science on the way we should treat and deal with the children who have difficulties?
To follow up on what Dr. Kohler was saying, I think that the other thing that we should recognize about science is we know a lot about what works to help kids. To follow up on what Dr. Steinmetz was saying, we don't often do it. But there are two really key points. One is that what happens to kids is not just fate. It's choices we make as a society, and what happens for kids is largely preventable. This is about choices we make as a society, and there are answers. There are things that really work to help kids that have been proven over and over and over and over again. As good as any antihypertensive I should be on, there have been studies that have looked at problems like child abuse, that have looked at problems like domestic violence, that have looked at problems like mental illness, and demonstrated that there are community-level interventions, community-level preventive strategies that are effective. So one of the things that my colleague Andy Aline teaches our residents is do what works, don't reinvent the wheel, and don't repeat proven mistakes. So excuse me for being provincial. President Harry Truman said it a different way. He said, there's nothing new in the world except the history you don't know. There's nothing new in the world except the history you don't know. For every one of these problems, there's an incredible amount of literature and science about what's effective. We don't know all the answers, but we know a lot about what to do. So in a realm that I work with at the Children's Agenda of child abuse prevention, it's really clear that there are programs like the Triple P Positive Parenting Program and the Nurse Family Partnership Program that reduce child abuse for up to 75% of child abuse in the most vulnerable families. You know, Prime Minister Blair, before he left being Prime Minister of England, instituted the Nurse Family Partnership Program in 20 communities based on the evidence that it had for improving child abuse. The results are pretty staggering. There's a number of other things that have gone on in the United Kingdom to decrease child poverty and to do other work around kids, but one of the things that's really clear is that child abuse and neglect rates have dramatically declined. So in terms of your question, there is real science, not only about the neurobiology, which is so incredible, so exciting, so I'm in awe of, but there's also science that says we know answers about what to do. Not all of them, but we have a lot of information about what to do on a community level that could really help kids and families. It's a question of generating the political will to do it. Did that help?
Yeah, sure. No, let me just add one thing, because I saw reading some of your papers, this picture which, I mean, everybody should see, about the brain of a normally developing child and the brain of a child who has suffered a lot of abuse and difficulties, and it's striking to see the difference, even in volume. And I think that's what I'm thinking about, what science tells us. If science tells us so many interesting and concrete impacts of the social problems, then should we publish more? Should we tell more about what science tells us to promote a better understanding of the necessity to implement the solutions that we probably already know, but that we should implement in a more vigorous way? We can keep on that, maybe.
Oui, on sait beaucoup plus.
Well, actually, you know,
que dont nous avons besoin
we
pour
know
faire
a lot
des changements.
more than what we need to actually proceed to change. We should not hide and saying behind, you know, the facts that we don't know enough or anything. No, we know, we have everything at hand and what we need. No, what to do in a community, environment for a population, daycare centers, and better nutrition for children, public safety issues. In Montreal, where do you see accident? Where do you see children that are being hit by a car and who die on the streets? It's not in Westmount that you see the majority of these accidents. So why don't we respect also building standards? There are no inspection on some really poor quality housing, but people live there. Why don't we also respect schools? And we have some schools that are not being maintained, and you have to close them down because of mold. And you take children away from these schools, and then they lose contact with the community and the environment they were familiar with. We add stress to them. It's additional stress in the decisions we make. Why do we have more? Don't we have more parks where children can play? They play in the streets. We should have more playgrounds in parks, more specialized parks. And why are they not cleaned up, those parks? Why don't we have also sports equipment in those parks? And why don't we have employment and jobs in the communities? Those are things that we can change. We have some communities on the island of Montreal where things have changed, where the conditions are relevant. And so why do we have some other environments when it's not? We have to ask ourselves these questions because we are able to act. And it's not a question of money. As Dr. Kaczorowski was saying, it's better to have a child, you know, in good health rather than trying to repair a broken grown-up. And this is an old concept. And to quote another one from another century, it was Admiral Nelson that says that for him, it was a lot easier to keep his seamen in health rather than having the doctor trying to heal them. So that's the same thing, you know, you have to do that. Dr. Kohler?
Practically all countries agree that the children are the future of their societies, and they pronounce children as a focus group for almost everything. You have to invest in children and things like that. At least when they speak and when they write, they say so. I think we should really believe that, and we should follow it up in a way that children and children's health and children's well-being should be the focus, really, and then I mean all children. We should not only focus on the disadvantaged children or the children in the bottom. We should really say that all children need to be supported. They need playgrounds, they need protection, they need everything. It's not only for the poor ones. And then most of the intervention that we read about and we see in studies are directed towards the poorest, the most needed. And it's good in a way, but I think you should also realize that we need to support the whole group of children. That's the most important thing. We could, of course, do something like, again, I'm quoting Sir Michael Marmot, who in his report, he says that all the actions that we do for children must be universal, but with a scale and intensity that is proportionate to the level of disadvantage. We call this proportionate universalism, and it's a term that is now growing and coming all over in Europe. Proportionate universalism. You direct your interventions, your activities, your thinking, your actions towards the universe, but you do it proportionate to the need. But the important issue here is children as a group are the most important thing to focus on. Thank you.
Yes?
I'd like to also bring in the economists, and not only the lawyers and the doctors. The economists have shown that you get at least a 16% return on investment for doing things for young children. Anything that benefits young children gives you a 16% return on investment. So you make money by helping kids. It doesn't cost. You make money. If you try to fix the broken system, it costs money. If you try to reverse the health problems or do the job training as adults, it's not as effective and it's more costly. One of the key problems for the kids is poverty, is economic insecurity. And as a doctor, you need to be concerned with what are the main issues facing the family. What is causing the family the most concerns? And often it's about job insecurity and worrying about where the next meal or where the next rent payment will come from. And that has to be a concern for us, for everybody, not just for the parents, because the child's health is not going to be where you want it to be unless we can do something about the deep concerns of the family. One of the most important things for the children and for their parents is to believe in themselves, in their own efficacy, to have hope, to believe that if they take action, they can improve things, to believe that if they try, they can succeed. It's very curious because any of you who have seen toddlers on their way to walking have noticed that they fall, right? You never say to a toddler who's fallen a few times that day on the way to walking, you get a D in walking today. We never say that. We universally say, don't worry, I know you're going to be able to do that. And then think about what happens in school. It's the exact opposite. You get a D today, instead of saying, I know you're going to be able to do that. How different is that message? And it's the same thing for the parents who are struggling so and feel so hopeless. I know together we're going to be able to get out of this. Together, I'm not going to let you fall. I'm going to be there for you. Together, we're going to be able to do this. Everybody's quoting people, so I'll give a quote. Goethe said, treat people as if they were what they're capable of being, and you help them become. Treat people as if they are what they ought to be, and you help them become what they're capable of being. Just have faith And that accomplishes so much. And lastly, we haven't talked about attachment, but the attachment of the child with the parents is the best insurance for future success in life and for happiness in life, even in the face of economic adversity. To be able to feel secure that my parent is there for me, I know that they love me, and I know that I can rely on them. And then as an adult, if we didn't have secure attachment, we often repeat what we've experienced in the past. But you can get out of that cycle. And the way to get out of that cycle is to come to just some conscious, coherent understanding of what happened to you as a child. Not to make it right, but to make it a story that you can wrap your mind around. And the science shows that if you just have it at the level of a story you can wrap your mind around, then the prognosis for your child's attachment is as good as if you were securely attached as a child. So we don't have to give up and say generations are going to repeat all the problems of the past. We can break that cycle. Thank you.
Dr. Toller, you said something that worried me, because you come from a society which has a very progressive social system, prosperous society in relative terms, but you said still we see negative signs. We see increase in problems for children. What is the failure? What's the problem?
We really don't know. There are many theories. Why is it like that? I mean, have we invested less than we should into these issues? Are these the consequences of something that happened before we were there? Or what is really happening? The very concrete things we can see is that the inequity in society is increasing. As I said, the general economy is going up, but it's going up more for the rich than for the poor. And the difference between the gap between the two groups are increasing. And that is not only bad for those who have not enough. The poverty, so to speak, is increasing, but it's also a problem for the sense of coherence in society. If the difference, we used to be a very coherent society where the difference between the rich and the poor are very small, but that is increasing. And we are now looking on why is it like that, and we see it specifically in families with children. I've studied that now for instance, in my hometown, Gothenburg, which are 500,000 people, the politicians are very concerned that part of the city is poor, the other part is rich, which is not unusual. But they wanted to change that. They said the staircase of inequity must disappear in our city, which is a very good pronunciation by the politicians. And so they say, we will do that in all groups, but we are very much concerned about the children. So could you, before we do that, could you have a look at how is the situation for children in the different parts of the city? So I constructed a child health index, and I looked at the different parts of the city, and I could immediately see that there was great differences between the different parts of the city. When it came to child poverty, when it came to percentage of children who finished school, and when it came to dental health and mental health and use of alcohol, tobacco, and things like that, abortion, things all over the place. You can see the difference, except when it came to use of alcohol, because that was less in the poor part, probably because alcohol is quite expensive. But it could also be that that poor part is inhabited by immigrants, and most of these immigrants come from Somalia, Pakistan, things like that, where they are Muslims, so they don't use alcohol. So it's quite interesting to go in depth to see why are these differences there and why are they not there, which we could expect to be. So this is a concern now with the present, also the present government in Sweden, which happens to be a right-wing government. I just met the Minister of Health the other day, and she said something that made me happy. She said, "We in Sweden are not. We don't feel well if not everybody feels well." I think that was I didn't expect that from a right-wing minister, but anyway, she said so, and I think that was it's a good sign that the government is quite concerned about what is happening when it comes to equity and inequity in the country.